Last week, I interviewed Andreanecia Morris with Housing Louisiana about Louisiana's blighted property. This week, our conversation continues with the last edition of that interview. Morris gives us updates on the effects of short-term rentals on surrounding communities in New Orleans. So what are the concerns with short-term rentals and how they're affecting communities currently?
The first concern is always losing homes that are being used right now to house families, people with children, seniors, that those homes will be taken offline and made available for tourists because it's more profitable. One of the other concerns that we have, though, is the larger issue is that by focusing so much on short-term rentals, on Airbnbs, we're ignoring other easier, simpler ways to address the housing crisis. Short-term rentals aren't the biggest problem that you have when it comes to affordable housing. And we need to make sure that we're looking at other ways of creating affordable housing while still developing and maintaining our tourism economy at the same time. But we can't let short-term rentals just take over neighborhoods. We can't just let them push people out. We've got to be able to interrupt that cycle, and we've got to be able to provide folks with better opportunities to make sure that our neighborhoods are diverse and healthy and most importantly, home to the people of Louisiana, not just a bunch of visitors who want to come here and have fun.
So in New Orleans, we've been hearing about short-term rentals for years now. What's happened with them? I mean, has anything changed? What's the current status?
Other than legalizing them, there's not been a lot of good news on this front, and it's leading to other communities. Shreveport has been looking at how do they look at legalizing short-term rentals. Baton Rouge has been talking about it for a while, and sometimes the model in New Orleans is held up as a good model, but it's not being implemented well, and it actually causes more consternation. There was recently a legal ruling that struck down or made a way to strike down a lot of the rules that were put in place. There was an attempt to try to prioritize local owners over out-of-town owners, and that was seen as problematic. Instead of doing something like simply capping the number of short-term rentals, which is what the Fifth Circuit actually said. They said, why didn't New Orleans cap its short-term rentals instead of setting up this tiered system? And that was something that was actually recommended and said, listen, if we're worried about having too many, let's find the number that we think is tolerable and set a limit.
In your opinion, I mean, is that a good way to implement change?
Absolutely. That was one of our recommendations, that we actually look to cap it, because at the same time, you want to be focusing on, instead of playing whack-a-mole and stopping short-term rentals, you've got to be making sure that we're being proactive and creating housing opportunities for the people of Louisiana. People need somewhere to stay, and they need that somewhere needs to be safe and healthy and decent. And while we've been talking about short-term rentals no less than 3 times in the last 6 years, New Orleans has not been dealing with its slumlord problem. We've been ignoring the needs of renters while hyper-focusing on where tourists stay, and allowing the renters that we say that we care about to live in ever riskier conditions without putting together real strategies to help them.
So when you talk about the status of New Orleans, I mean, you mentioned earlier that people think short-term rentals are really the issue whenever it comes to housing, but what is the big issue when it comes to housing in the city?
Lack of affordable, safe, decent, and affordable housing. During the pandemic, in the first year of the pandemic, short-term rentals in New Orleans fell to an all-time low. At the same time, eviction for Black women and their children went through the roof. So while you want to make sure that there's not too many short-term rentals, particularly in neighborhoods near job centers, you also want to make sure that you're creating more affordable housing. It's not simply enough to be against something. You've got to be for something. You've got to be actively creating opportunities. And short-term rentals could, if properly managed, and they haven't been properly managed. They've not been properly, the rules that have been put in place have not been followed. They've not even collected the taxes that could be used to create affordable housing, the revenue that short-term rentals are collecting. So we've got to put together rules that make sense and enforce them, and then move on to the larger problems that affect the people of Louisiana.
So in a perfect world, how would you solve this issue, of having short-term rentals and affordable housing, and everything, lives together in a healthy environment?
Prioritize short-term rentals, prioritize housing. Prioritize affordable housing. That means making sure we're putting the needs of the people first. and saying, okay, this is where you want to live, this is where you need to live, making sure that you have everything that you need, and short-term rentals being a part of that calculation. In my opinion, we should be taxing them at the highest rate possible and using that revenue to create affordable housing and limiting where they go, limiting how many of them that we have, saying what's a healthy balance in our ecosystem of hotels and housing and restaurants and community gardens and parks and playgrounds. What is that calculation? And then giving people the chance to participate in a cultural economy that isn't so predatory, that isn't so imbalanced, that's so out of whack. That's what we should be doing, putting the needs of the people first, and then making the calculation from there.
All right, so I was writing down some of these things so I can remember. Prioritize housing, using tax revenue and putting that toward affordable housing,
Yes.
and also the cap that the court mentioned earlier.
Yeah. The same. Don't build this many, right? Don't let it be unfettered and unregulated, and they're everywhere.
All right, well, thank you so much for telling us about this, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.